Hey guys, I'm your host Matt, and we're here to talk about the Dolphins versus the Jets on the Matt Newton Football Show. Now, the Dolphins were able to come away with a 36-22 victory against the New York Jets, and it's very important that the Dolphins won this game because had they lost, this might have been the end of their season. But the Dolphins were able to pull out the win, and really that's the most important thing. But a lot of people believe that the Dolphins didn't really play well enough against a bad team at home like they did last year, and some question as to whether the Dolphins were able to do it against a good team next week as they have the challenge of facing the Houston Texans on the road. Now, we don't know if the Dolphins are going to win that game or lose, but at least we do know that for at least one more week, they'll be relevant as it relates to the playoff picture in the AFC. Now, the Dolphins did well enough to pull out this game in overtime, and it wasn't a pretty win, but in the NFL, you take a win, right? It doesn't matter if it's pretty or if it's ugly. You take the win when you can. Now, for a minute there, it looked very dire for the Dolphins because in the fourth quarter, the Jets had the football, and it seemed as though they could possibly kick a field goal, maybe run out the time, and the Dolphins wouldn't have enough time to stage a comeback or tie the game up at the end. But a few things went the Dolphins' way. The Dolphins were out of timeouts on that last pass to Davante Adams. Aaron Rodgers threw a back shoulder throw to the left sideline, and the Dolphins didn't have any timeouts. So had he stayed in bounds, they could have drained off another 35 seconds or so off the play clock, and that would have put the Dolphins in a position where they wouldn't be able to get the ball enough time to do anything. Luckily, the Jets played that particular play very poorly. It was coached poorly, or it was played poorly by the players, but Davante Adams caught the pass, but allowed himself to get pushed out of bounds by Kendall Fuller. And that really was like a timeout for the Dolphins because it saved them from having to allow the Jets to run out the clock. So it was fortuitous that the Dolphins were able to escape with a play like that. But all in all, the Dolphins did just enough to beat the Jets. And really, that's all that matters at the end of the game. There are a lot of guys you can give game balls to in this game. Tua Tagovailoa is probably the one that stands out the most. Tua had a big game. He threw for over 300 yards. He was clutch, had a 73% completion percentage rate, passer rating, I believe, over 107. Since he's been back after the concussion, I think he has like 15 touchdowns to 1 interception in terms of his touchdown to interception ratio. So Tua has played very well during this stretch. Now, are there parts of since his return that he could have done a little bit better? Of course, you want you to know that your starting quarterback can help you win games, right? Not just put up a bunch of statistics. But for Tua's part, you have to at least give him credit that he's keeping the team in a position to win the majority of the time. And that's what you want your quarterback to do, to at least allow the team to feel as though they have a shot to win. And your quarterback is responsible for that. And most of that has to do with him being available on a week-by-week basis. And Tua himself said in a press conference earlier this week that he felt that he was a little bit responsible for the team being where it is. Before the game, they were 5-7. They're 6-7 now after this victory. But he felt as though part of the reason why the Dolphins were in this position, being 5-7, was because of him, that he didn't really protect himself well enough in week 2. It caused him to miss 4 games, and it put the team in a bad spot. So, shout out to Tua. I guess he showed a little bit of maturity and responsibility in taking ownership of that. And, that's the kind of thing that you would like to hear your leaders say. So I applaud Tua for stepping up and admitting that, maybe his play was a little bit reckless in that moment. And hopefully he can learn from it and do better because the Dolphins are much better when Tua is in the lineup, right? I mean, everybody knows that. So, Tua has to do better protecting himself. But since then, it seems as though outside of the one play with the Rams where he threw an interception and tried to make the tackle, except for that play, he's been pretty good at keeping himself out of harm's way. So far, so good. We'll see how that projects into the future this season and the following seasons. But as of right now, it seems like he has his head on straight, no pun intended. Now, another game ball can go to Jason Sanders. Jason Sanders knocked out a big 57-yard field goal right before the half, kicked another field goal for 52 yards at the end of the regulation to put the game into overtime. And, I was a person who believed that Jason Sanders' best days were kind of behind him. There was a season a few years ago where he was almost money from 50 yards plus. And in the last year or two, his accuracy in that range has been dwindling a bit. And I myself lost a little bit of confidence in Jason Sanders, I'll be honest with you. But this season, credit to Jason Sanders. He's kicked well from 50 and beyond. He's been clutch, not just kicking field goals in game situations, but also kicking them in very clutch moments. So hats off to Jason Sanders. He's done very well so far this season. He's playing up to the contract that he got a few years ago. And, he definitely helped the Dolphins stay competitive in this game because they really needed his field goals to keep the game close enough to get the game into overtime. So he gets a game ball. Wide receivers, Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle, they both get a game ball because Tyreek Hill went over 100 yards for the first time since week 1. Jaylen Waddle had 7 catches for 99 yards, including a 2-point conversion. So, shout out to those guys. Those wide receivers are heavily criticized for not being productive enough, especially considering how much money they make. And they just haven't really been putting together the kind of statistics at the end of the game that would lead you to believe that they're earning the money that they make. But this is one of their better games, especially as a tandem that they've had in a long time, where both Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle played well. So it's good to see them not only play well, but play well with each other in the same game. And a special game ball goes out to them for kind of like, at least for one game, giving us flashbacks of the potential they can be from 2022 and 2023. So shout out to those guys. A big game ball goes out to, if you watch the game in overtime, they said some fans were leaving the stadium after, with 70 seconds left in the game. There were fans that were exiting the building. And it was a close game. It looked like the Jets might have run out the clock and kicked the field goal at the end. But for fans to leave that early in the contest with 70 seconds left when anything can happen, it's a little bit discouraging. Surely it must have been a little bit discouraging for the team if they even noticed. But thankfully, they were able to stay focused and complete their objective, which is to win the game. Now, in overtime, Jonnu Smith came alive. I don't think he had a reception in regulation, but then in overtime, Jonnu Smith shows up like, he was the boss. He was over here catching passes, screen passes, catching passes across the middle for a touchdown. In the end zone, Tyreek Hill cleared out some of the coverage, but Tua Tagovailoa was able to get the ball to Jonnu Smith in traffic. And, it was just a ridiculous pass that Tua threw. I don't think he gets enough credit for throwing that pass because he threw it between a lot of bodies. It's always difficult to throw the ball in the end zone. There's a lot of people in a confined space. But Tua was able to get the ball to him, even with all the traffic in there, and throw a dot for Jonnu Smith, which, of course, he caught the ball, got the game-winning score, and that was all she wrote. So it's great to see Tua be daring now. And early in that drive, Jonnu Smith took a couple of screen passes on back-to-back plays and actually used those screen passes to get yards after the catch, which allowed the Dolphins to get in field goal range almost immediately after those 2 catches. Devon Achane also contributed, I believe, with a catch on his own. Either was Devon Achane or Waddle, I can't remember, on the left side. One of the 2 guys, they caught another screen pass and took it upfield for a few yards. So the Dolphins got their screen game going in overtime. And when they needed it most, Tua came through with a clutch touchdown pass to seal the victory. So game ball goes to Jonnu Smith. He might have been late to the party, but he showed up on time in terms of being productive and doing what he needed to do to help the team secure the win. And the defense, there's not a lot of great things you can say about the defense. They didn't play particularly well. It seems as though the Jets were able to get explosive plays against the defense. It seemed like the defense had another bad habit of missing tackles, which is something that people were saying, well, it was probably due to the cold weather why the Dolphins were missing tackles. But I went on Twitter and I was telling the followers there that, it seems as though the Jets were causing more missed tackles against the Dolphins defense than the Packers did last week. And I argued that perhaps the Dolphins played better defense against the Packers than they did against the Jets this week, especially when you consider the situation being at home and everything. The Dolphins didn't tackle well. Their secondary players, again, came up short in that area. Both safeties, Jordan Poyer and Javon Holland. Both of those guys had issues making tackles and setting the edge and, restricting cutbacks. Jalen Ramsey also was victimized on some of those run plays and even receptions where there was a little bit of yards after the catch. So these guys on defense didn't really play very well in the secondary. But if you have to give them any credit, at least they kept the Jets from scoring a bunch of touchdowns. They held them to field goals most of the time, which allowed the Dolphins offense to really stay in the game. If the defense gave up more touchdowns in the red zone, then this game could have been a blowout, and the Dolphins offense may not have had an opportunity to answer. So if you have to give them credit for anything, it would be that. But I thought early in the game, Garrett Wilson proved to be way too quick for Jalen Ramsey to cover. And Jalen Ramsey was a liability in the first half. Matter of fact, he was a liability throughout the entire game once he was covering Garrett Wilson. And I felt that Anthony Weaver should have made an adjustment. And I posted this on Twitter that, Jalen Ramsey should have probably been moved over to defend Devontae Adams, who's not as fast or as quick as Garrett Wilson, and then maybe that'll be a better matchup because they're both kind of big size guys. So maybe the strength and the size of Devontae Adams will be a better matchup for Jalen Ramsey because he's not as quick as, let's say, a Garrett Wilson is. But the Dolphins continue to allow Jalen Ramsey to try to defend Garrett Wilson. And he was getting schooled all day. Garrett Wilson had over 100 yards in the third quarter and caught numerous passes off of him, got open seemingly at ease. So the Dolphins are lucky that didn't result in more points for the Jets, which again would have made it more difficult for the Dolphins to answer. So while I can't give too many people on defense a game ball, I will say that Jordan Brooks looked like the best player on the field. He looked like the best player in terms of coverage and defending people in his area, in his zones. He even defended Garrett Wilson on one play, which was better than anything that Jalen Ramsey did early in the day. Jordan Brooks also played well defending the flats, keeping running backs from either catching the ball or when they did catch the ball, limit their yards after the catch. So Jordan Brooks, I thought, had an outstanding game. He tackled well, he filled the run gaps well, and he also played coverage. So he's probably the only person I would really give a game ball to because I thought his play was that good on Sunday. But I will give the defense a game ball just for not allowing the Jets to put the ball in the end zone too many times. That's something that cannot be understated. You have to hold them to field goals and not touchdowns because, it's kind of easy. Well, let me not say easy, but it's easier to move the ball in between the 20s in the NFL than it is to get it from the 20-yard line into the end zone, in the red zone. So I will say that the Dolphins did a great job of limiting that. And by limiting that, they allowed the offense to be able to come back. So credit to them. And another game ball I guess I can go to is Danny Crossman. He's taken a lot of fire by Dolphin fans, myself included, in terms of his mediocre, if not downright awful special teams unit. And usually his special teams unit, they usually do something throughout the course of the game that you just shake your head and you're just embarrassed by. But today, Jason Sanders was on the money, and Malik Washington had a very big return at the end, near the end of regulation, that really set the Dolphins offense up to get in the field goal range rather easily. And the Dolphins offense, it wasn't exactly a smooth operation in that final drive in regulation, but they did just enough to get the ball into Jason Sanders' range, and Jason Sanders was able to knock down the field goal. So, I think that covers most of the people who played in the game, I think, that were impactful. The coaching staff with Mike McDaniel, I think he did a good job in terms of passing the ball when he needed to, going for it on fourth down when he needed to, and kicking field goals on fourth down when he needed to. It seems as though he had a good feel, a good pulse of how the team was in terms of the momentum and when they needed to push forward and when they needed to settle for field goals. So there was one fourth down. I thought he probably could have been better served early in the game. Instead of taking the field goal to go up, I think they took a field goal to go up 12-10. I thought maybe they should have went for it then because I think our defense really needs to play with a big lead for it to thrive. But the Dolphins opted for a field goal, and then for a while it seemed like the Dolphins and Jets kept exchanging field goals for a while. So So the defense does get credit for, limiting them to field goals. But the offense has to do a better job of punching it in themselves, right? They have to score touchdowns so that other teams can't keep it close. So, Mike McDaniel had a good pulse, I think, on the team for the most part. There were no really egregious errors that I saw really coaching-wise. Again, I thought that defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver could have made an adjustment in terms of Jalen Ramsey's coverage, but again, nothing too egregious in terms of the coaching. Now, the execution was a different story altogether. It seemed like the Dolphins defensive players were late getting to their assignments, late rallying to the football, and also taking bad angles, which led to missed tackles. And Javon Holland really, for a guy who's in a contract year, he just hasn't had really a good season at all. And this game was no different. So you have to give credit for Javon Holland for the week 1 punch of Travis Etienne on the goal line that allowed the Dolphins to win that game, or at least put them in a position to win that game. But outside of that forced fumble, Javon Holland has been mostly absent for large portions this season. So that's it for this video. Leave a comment in the section below, and I'll see you in the next video.